Princess Althina sat on the cold metal floor of her chamber, staring at her reflection in the polished steel wall. Once she had been the pride of the Xelari Empire, the strongest, the fastest, the most skilled warrior among her people. But now she was nothing. Her legs no longer worked. She remembered the day it happened. The assassination attempt had come without warning. A plasma grenade, hidden beneath her throne, had exploded, tearing through her body. The healers had saved her life, but not her legs. The once great warrior princess could no longer even stand. Among the Xelari, strength was everything. Those who could not fight were considered worthless. A crippled princess had no place in the royal court. Her father, Emperor Xalvor, had not even looked at her when he made the decision. "You are no longer fit to rule. Leave." Just like that, her family, her people, her empire, everything was taken from her. Now she lived on a desolate colony world at the edge of the galaxy, abandoned in a place where criminals and exiles were sent to be forgotten. The air was thick with dust, and the sun burned red in the sky. The streets were filled with broken machines and broken people. Zalthina did not beg. She still had her pride. But there were days when she sat in the darkness, staring at her useless legs, wondering if death would have been better. Then, one day, a human found her. She had seen humans before, of course. They were smaller, weaker than the Xelari, but they were persistent creatures. This one was no different. He had short brown hair, rough hands, and a face that carried both kindness and experience. His name was Daniel Carter. "You look like you need some help," he said. Zalthina glared at him. "I need nothing from a human." Daniel didn't flinch. "Sure you do. You need food. You need repairs for that broken chair. And most of all, you need to stop pretending you're already dead." Her fingers tightened around the armrests of her wheelchair. "I am Xelari, a warrior. Without my legs, I am nothing." Daniel crouched down to her level, his expression calm but firm. "That's the biggest pile of nonsense I've ever heard." Zalthina narrowed her eyes. "You do not understand my people." "No," Daniel agreed, "but I understand something better. I know that real strength isn't just about standing up. It's about refusing to stay down." For the first time in a long while, Zalthina didn't have a response. Daniel stood up and held out his hand. "Come on, princess. Let's fix those legs of yours." She looked at his hand, hesitated, then turned away. But deep inside, for the first time since her exile, a tiny spark of hope flickered in the darkness. Zalthina sat in the corner of a rusty old workshop, watching the human named Daniel Carter work. Sparks flew from his welding tool as he repaired a broken hoverbike, his hands moving with steady skill. The place smelled of oil, metal, and old machinery. She didn't understand why she was here. After their first meeting, she had ignored him. She had tried to push him away, like she had pushed away everyone else. But Daniel was persistent. Every day he came back. He brought food. He fixed her wheelchair. He even chased off a gang of thugs who had tried to rob her. "Why do you keep helping me?" she finally asked. Daniel didn't look up. "Because you need it. I did not ask for help." He chuckled. "Yeah, well, sometimes people need help even when they don't ask for it." Zalthina frowned. Among her people, weakness was not tolerated. If you fell, you got up on your own, or you stayed down forever. But humans, they were different. This one, at least, didn't seem to care about strength the way Xelari did. "You waste your time," she said coldly. "I am broken." Daniel stopped working and turned to her. His eyes, sharp and full of fire, locked onto hers. "No, your legs don't work. That's different from being broken." She clenched her fists. "You don't understand. I was meant to be a warrior. My people only respect strength. I have no place in this universe anymore." Daniel leaned against his workbench, crossing his arms. "That's a pretty stupid way to look at things." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Excuse me. You think strength is only about fighting. About walking. That's nonsense. Strength is about surviving, about adapting. He tapped the side of his head. You're smart. You still have a brain, a will, and a fire in your heart. That's more than a lot of people in this dump have. Zolfina opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. He wasn't wrong. She had survived. Even when her own people had abandoned her, she was still here. But was survival really enough? Daniel sighed and walked over to a metal shelf, grabbing something covered in a cloth. He placed it on the table and pulled the cloth away. Underneath was a sleek, high-tech cybernetic leg. I've been working on this, he said. It's not perfect, but with a few adjustments, it could fit you. Zolfina stared at it, her throat tight. Why? She whispered. Why do you care? Daniel smiled, but there was something sad in his eyes. Because I know what it's like to lose something, and because I believe in second chances. She looked at the cybernetic leg again, her fingers twitching. For the first time in months, a choice stood before her. Would she stay in the darkness, or would she take his hand? Zolfina stared at the cybernetic leg on the workbench. The metal gleamed under the dim workshop lights, its design sleek yet strong. It was a thing of beauty, power, reborn in steel. But she couldn't bring herself to touch it. I don't need it, she muttered, turning her head away. Daniel sighed, wiping his hands with a rag. You sure about that? I am Xilari. If I cannot walk on my own, then I do not deserve to walk at all. Daniel shook his head and leaned against the table. That's the dumbest thing I've heard today. Zolfina's eyes narrowed. Do not insult me, human. I'm not insulting you, princess. I'm insulting your way of thinking. He crossed his arms. Your people throw you away because you can't walk, like you're a broken tool. And you believe them. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that the Xilari were the strongest species in the galaxy, that their ways had built an empire that stretched across the stars. But deep inside, doubt crawled through her mind like a shadow. Daniel stepped closer, his voice softer now. You think using a cybernetic leg makes you weak. Let me tell you something. I fought in wars. I saw soldiers lose arms, legs, even their eyes. The strong ones weren't the ones who gave up. They were the ones who adapted, who kept fighting no matter what. Zolfina looked down at her useless legs. Was she really weak for wanting to stand again? She clenched her fists. Even if I accept it, even if I wear that thing, it does not change the truth. I have no place among my people anymore. Daniel smirked. Then maybe it's time to stop caring about what they think. She blinked. What? You don't have to prove anything to them, he said. Prove it to yourself. For the first time in a long while, Zolfina felt something stir inside her. It wasn't anger or bitterness or even sadness. It was something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. Slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of the cybernetic leg. Daniel grinned. That's more like it. She exhaled sharply. If this does not work, I will throw you out of an airlock. He laughed. Fair enough. Now, let's get to work. As Daniel prepared for the surgery, Zolfina closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time since her exile, she was choosing to fight back, not against an enemy, but against the doubt in her own heart. That was the first thing Zolfina felt when she woke up. A deep, burning ache in her legs, sharp like a blade cutting through her nerves. She gritted her teeth, refusing to cry out. She was Xilari. She would not show weakness. Easy there, princess. The familiar voice of Daniel Carter pulled her out of her thoughts. She turned her head and saw him sitting beside her, arms crossed, a small smile on his face. His clothes were covered in grease and metal dust, but his eyes were full of satisfaction. You survived, he said. Of course I did, she muttered, shifting slightly. A strange sensation ran through her lower body, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked down and saw the cybernetic legs attached to her. The metal glowed faintly, humming with power. Her legs, She lifted one slightly, testing the movement. It responded immediately, smooth and precise. Her heart pounded. Could it be? Try standing, Daniel said. Zolthena hesitated. Fear crept into her mind. What if she failed? What if she collapsed like a pathetic weakling? She pushed those thoughts away. She was Silari. She had fought in battles, faced death more times than she could count. A simple machine would not defeat her. She gripped the edges of the workbench and took a deep breath. Then, slowly, she pushed herself up. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a whir of metal and energy, she rose to her feet. She was standing. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked down at herself, at the strong, stable cybernetic legs holding her up. She had forgotten how it felt to stand tall. Daniel clapped his hands. Not bad. Now, let's see if you can walk. Zolthena took a step forward. The movement was strange at first, different from her real legs, but not unnatural. Another step. Then another. She was walking. Then she stumbled. Daniel caught her before she fell. Whoa, easy. It'll take time to get used to them. Zolthena clenched her fists. I do not have time. I must master them now. Daniel sighed. You Silari really don't know patience, huh? She shot him a glare. I was once the strongest warrior of my people. I will not be weak now. Daniel shook his head. You think strength is just about getting back on your feet. No, princess. Real strength is learning how to fall and keep going. She stared at him. These legs will help you walk, but you have to learn how to live again, Daniel said. That means patience. That means training. And that means accepting that sometimes you'll fail. Zolthena exhaled slowly. Fine. Teach me. Daniel grinned. Now that's what I wanted to hear. Let's get to work. And for the first time in a long while, Zolthena was ready to learn. Zolthena moved through the abandoned scrapyard, her new cybernetic legs making almost no sound. The first few days had been difficult, stumbling, falling, struggling to adjust. But Daniel had been right. Strength wasn't just about standing up. It was about refusing to stay down. Now she could walk, run, fight, and soon she would have to. Daniel sat on an overturned crate, watching as she practiced. He tossed a metal rod at her, and she caught it mid-air with ease. Not bad, he said. You're learning fast. Zolthena spun the rod in her hands, testing its weight. I do not intend to remain weak for long. Daniel smirked. You were never weak, princess. Just lost. Before she could reply, the air suddenly felt wrong. The distant hum of machinery had vanished. The wind had stopped. A deep instinct, sharpened by years of training, sent a warning through her mind. Something was coming. Then, boom! A plasma blast struck the ground near them, sending a shockwave through the scrapyard. Dissolve. Zolthena moved instantly, grabbing Daniel and pulling him behind a pile of wreckage. Dust and metal shards rained down around them. What the hell was that? Daniel coughed. Zolthena narrowed her eyes. Assassins. Figures emerged from the shadows. Tall, armored Silari warriors, their energy weapons glowing in the dim light. They moved with lethal precision, surrounding the scrapyard. Their leader, a scared veteran named General Kozor, stepped forward, his expression cold. Princess Zolthena, he said, you should have stayed dead. Zolthena clenched her fists. She had expected her people to forget her. Instead, they wanted to erase her completely. Daniel muttered, guess they're not here to talk. Kozor raised his weapon. The High Council has ordered your execution. You are a disgrace to our kind. Surrender, and your death will be swift. Zolthena bared her teeth. I do not surrender. Then she moved. Her cybernetic legs propelled her forward faster than she ever could have imagined. The assassins expected a crippled exile. What they got was a warrior reborn in steel. She dodged a plasma blast and struck the nearest enemy, her metal fist crushing his armor like paper. Another came at her with a blade, but she twisted, using her enhanced speed to snap his weapon in half. Daniel wasn't idle either. He grabbed a modified pulse rifle from his workbench and fired, taking down an assassin before he could get a shot off. I really hate your people's definition of family reunions. Zolthina ducked under a swing and countered with a powerful kick. Her cybernetic limb struck Kozor's chest, sending him crashing into a pile of scrap. The remaining assassins hesitated. Their target was supposed to be weak. Helpless. Not this. Kozor groaned, glaring at her. What are you? Zolthina stood tall, her new legs humming with power. I am still Xilari, she said, but I am also more. Then she and Daniel ran, disappearing into the night. The hunt had begun. The desert wind howled through the night, kicking up dust and sand as Zolthina and Daniel ran through the ruins of the scrapyard. The glow of plasma rifles flickered behind them, the Xilari assassins in pursuit. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. I really hope you've got a plan, Princess. Zolthina's cybernetic legs carried her effortlessly over broken metal and uneven ground. The old Xilari warrior in her wanted to turn and fight, but she knew they were outnumbered. Fighting now meant dying. We need cover, she said, scanning the terrain. Daniel pointed to a half-collapsed building in the distance. That old factory. We can lose them inside. Without hesitation, they sprinted toward it. Plasma bolts whizzed past them, scorching the ground. One blast nearly hit Daniel, but Zolthina grabbed him and pushed him forward. Keep moving, she ordered. They reached the factory's entrance and slipped inside. The air was thick with dust, the walls covered in rust and old markings from a long-forgotten mining operation. Daniel leaned against a crate, breathing heavily. Remind me to get in better shape, he muttered. Zolthina ignored him, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness. They will not stop hunting me, she said. Not until I am dead. Daniel reloaded his rifle. Then we just have to make sure that doesn't happen. A noise echoed through the factory, metal shifting, footsteps approaching. The assassins were closing in. Zolthina pressed herself against a wall, gripping a broken steel pipe like a weapon. The first assassin entered, his weapon raised. Zolthina moved fast. She grabbed his rifle and twisted, slamming him into a support beam. The impact knocked him unconscious. Daniel fired at the next attacker, forcing them to take cover. We need to get out of here before more show up. Zolthina saw a rusted ladder leading up to a catwalk. This way. They climbed quickly, reaching an old maintenance corridor that led out the back of the factory. They ran through the tunnels, emerging into a canyon where Daniel had hidden an old speeder bike. He jumped onto the bike and powered it up. Hop on. Zolthina hesitated for only a second before climbing behind him. The bike roared to life, speeding away just as the assassins reached the canyon. Plasma shots followed them, but they were already too far. As they rode into the night, Daniel grinned. You know, for someone who thought she was weak, you're doing a pretty damn good job staying alive. Zolthina smirked. I had a good teacher. For the first time since her exile, she felt something strange inside her. Not just survival, not just anger. Hope. But she knew this wasn't over. The Xilari would not stop. If she wanted to truly be free, she would have to stop running. She would have to fight back. The speeder bike skidded to a stop near a rocky outcrop, hidden beneath the shadows of jagged cliffs. Zolthina and Daniel dismounted quickly, scanning their surroundings. The desert stretched out endlessly, the sky above glowing with the distant light of the city they had left behind. We lost them. For now, Daniel said, catching his breath. Zolthina stood tall, her cybernetic legs humming with energy. She clenched her fists, her mind racing. They will keep coming. Again and again. Until I am dead. Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead. Then we need to find a way to stop them for good. Zolthina turned to him, her eyes burning with determination. No. I need to stop them. I am done running. Daniel frowned. You sure? We could disappear. Go to another planet. She shook her head. That is not who I am. I will not live my life in hiding like a coward. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temple. All right, fine. So what's the plan? You want to take on an entire auxiliary assassin squad by yourself. A small smirk crossed her face. Not alone. He raised an eyebrow. Oh no, I don't like that look. She stepped closer. You are a soldier, are you not? You have fought in wars. You know strategy, tactics. Daniel groaned. Yeah, and I also know that picking a fight with an elite kill squad is a terrible idea. Zalthena crossed her arms. You said strength is not just about fighting. It is about adapting, about refusing to stay down. Well, I refuse to stay down. Will you help me or not? Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then he chuckled. Damn it, princess. You're impossible. She smirked. I will take that as a yes. The trap is set. They spent the next few hours preparing. Zalthena studied the terrain, identifying choke points and places to ambush the assassins. Daniel rigged explosives from scavenged materials, placing them along the canyon paths. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, they were ready. Zalthena stood at the highest rock formation, watching the desert below. Soon, she spotted movement, figures approaching in the distance. The auxiliary assassins had tracked them again. She exhaled slowly. Here they come. Daniel crouched behind cover, gripping his rifle. Last chance to run. Zalthena grinned. Not this time. The assassins entered the canyon, weapons drawn. Khazor, their leader, stepped forward, his expression dark. Princess Zalthena, you cannot escape. She stepped into view, her voice strong. I do not need to escape. I am right where I want to be. She raised her hand. Daniel pressed the detonator. Boom. The canyon exploded with fire and dust, and the battle began. This time, Zalthena was not running. This time, she was fighting back. The explosion rocked the canyon, sending shockwaves through the rocky terrain. Dust and debris filled the air, and several auxiliary assassins were thrown off their feet by the blast. Zalthena didn't hesitate. She leaped from the high rock, her cybernetic legs absorbing the impact as she landed among the stunned warriors. Her fist lashed out, slamming into the nearest enemy, sending him crashing into the canyon wall. Daniel, positioned behind cover, fired precise shots with his rifle, picking off assassins who tried to regroup. Nice work, princess. But they're still coming. Khazor emerged from the dust, his armor scorched but his eyes burning with fury. You think this changes anything? You are still a traitor. You will still die. Zalthena smirked, rolling her shoulders. Let's find out. Khazor lunged at her, his energy blade slicing through the air. Zalthena dodged, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to sidestep the deadly strike. She countered with a powerful kick to his midsection, but he barely flinched. Strong, he admitted, but not strong enough. He struck back, his blade grazing her shoulder. Pain flared through her body, but she gritted her teeth, refusing to fall. Daniel saw the fight and cursed. Damn it, princess, don't try to take him alone. Zalthena ignored him. This was her fight. The assassins were regrouping, but Daniel had one last trick. He pulled out a small detonator and smirked. I love surprises. He pressed the button. Boom. A second set of explosions triggered, causing the canyon walls to shake. Rocks tumbled down, separating some of the assassins and cutting off their reinforcements. Now it was an even fight. Khazor growled. Clever, but you are still outmatched. Zalthena wiped the blood from her arm and smiled. We'll see. She attacked with everything she had. Punches, kicks, dodges. Khazor was fast, but her cybernetic legs made her faster. She weaved around his attacks, waiting for the right moment. Then she saw it, a slight opening in his defense. She moved instantly, her metal fist crashing into his helmet. The force shattered his visor, sending him stumbling backward. Before he could recover, she grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "You call me weak," she said, her voice like steel. "Yet I am still standing. And you?" Kezor struggled but could not break free. Zalthina tightened her grip. "Tell the High Council. If they send more assassins, I will send them back in pieces." Then she threw him to the ground and turned away. The remaining assassins, seeing their leader defeated, hesitated. Then, one by one, they retreated into the desert. Daniel walked up, lowering his rifle. "So, we won." Zalthina exhaled, the weight of the fight settling on her shoulders. For now, she looked at the rising sun. She was no longer running. She was free. The sun rose over the canyon, painting the sky in fiery shades of red and gold. The battle was over. The assassins had fled, leaving Zalthina and Daniel standing victorious. Daniel let out a long breath, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. Well, that was intense. Zalthina wiped the blood from her forehead, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. For years, she had been cast aside, left to rot in exile. But now she had fought back and won. Still, something inside her remained unsettled. "This is not over," she muttered. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Come on, princess. We just kicked their asses. What more do you want?" She turned to him, her eyes sharp. "The Xilari High Council will not accept this defeat. They will send more assassins, stronger ones." Daniel sighed. "So what? We run again." Zalthina clenched her fists. "No. I told you, I am done running." Daniel studied her for a moment, then chuckled. "You really don't know how to quit, do you?" She smirked. "Neither do you." He shrugged. "Fair point." Zalthina looked out at the horizon, her cybernetic legs humming softly. "For so long, I believed I was nothing without my old life, without my honor, my place in the Empire. But now, I see the truth." Daniel leaned against a rock. "And what truth is that?" She turned to face him. "I am not just a lost princess. I am something more. I have strength, not because of my body, but because I refuse to break." Daniel grinned. "Now you're starting to sound human." Zalthina let out a small chuckle. "Perhaps, and maybe that is not a bad thing." She stepped forward, her gaze firm. "The Xilari Empire will never stop hunting me. But what if, instead of waiting for them, I strike first?" Daniel's grin faded. "You want to go after them?" She nodded. "Not just for myself. There are others. Exiles, slaves, those the Empire has abandoned. What if I could give them a reason to fight? Chance to rise." Daniel scratched his chin. "So you want to build an army of misfits to take on the most powerful empire in the sector?" Zalthina met his gaze. "Would you stand by my side?" Daniel stared at her, then let out a deep sigh. "You know, I was planning on retiring. Maybe settling down on a nice, quiet planet." He smirked. "But I guess that'll have to wait." Zalthina placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then let us begin." As the sun continued to rise, two warriors stood together, not as a broken princess and a lost soldier, but as something new. A spark had been lit. The rebellion had begun. The desert wind howled as Zalthina and Daniel stood atop the canyon ridge, looking down at the vast wasteland before them. Somewhere out there, the Xilari Empire was regrouping, preparing to send more assassins, more soldiers, more destruction. But this time, Zalthina would not wait. Daniel crossed his arms. "So, where do we start?" Zalthina took a deep breath. "We need allies. Fighters. Those who have been cast aside, just like me." Daniel smirked. "Good thing the universe is full of people who hate the Xilari." They climbed onto the speeder bike and rode toward the nearest settlement. It was a lawless outpost, filled with smugglers, mercenaries, and exiles, exactly the kind of people they needed. As they entered, the crowd gave them cautious looks. Zalthena's presence drew whispers, an exiled Silari princess, still alive. Daniel nudged her. Looks like you're already famous. She ignored the stares and stepped onto a raised platform in the middle of the outpost. Then, in a loud, clear voice, she spoke. I know many of you have suffered under the Xilari Empire, she said. You have been hunted, enslaved, forgotten. People turned to listen. The murmur of the crowd grew louder. For too long, we have been alone. Scattered. Weak. But together, we can be strong. A grizzled mercenary stepped forward, arms crossed. And why should we follow you? Zalthena met his gaze without fear. Because I have seen the enemy. I have fought them, and I have won. She stepped closer, her voice filled with fire. I do not ask for loyalty. I ask for warriors, fighters, those who are ready to stand, to fight, to rise. Silence filled the outpost. Then, slowly, one by one, people stepped forward. A former Xilari general, stripped of his rank. A group of human freedom fighters, eager for revenge. A rogue AI, seeking purpose. A bounty hunter with a personal grudge against the Empire. Daniel whistled. Well, looks like we got ourselves an army. Zalthena nodded. Not yet, but we will. She turned back to the crowd. This is the beginning. The first spark of something greater. The Empire believes we are weak. She clenched her fists. Let us prove them wrong. A roar of agreement echoed through the outpost. Weapons were raised. Fists pounded against chests. The rebellion had begun. Daniel grinned at Zalthena. You really are impossible. She smirked. And you would not have it any other way. As the twin moons rose over the desert, the outpost prepared for war. Zalthena, once broken, once abandoned, now stood at the heart of something new. Not just a rebellion, a revolution. And for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged.